Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui kia koutou, no mai haere mai mō te kaupapa o te ata. My name's Tanya, I'm the social worker kaimahi pāpore at North Haven Hospice, te korowai Whangārei. And in my role, I'm commonly helping people get things organised, do problem solving, navigate tricky systems and try to pull things together to make end of life as seamless as possible for people and to reduce stress. So at hospice, anything that's not a doctor thing or a nursing thing kind of gets thrown to me. I talk about social workers, often our job is the too hard basket, and we're really good at hanging out in there and trying to peel things apart and make things not as hard. So that's my job really, is to try and ease the stress and help people get things sorted to have end of life be as comfortable and well supported as possible. And the session that I'm sharing today is going to be talking about a lot of the common things that I'm talking with people about every day, every week, about trying to get things sorted before end of life care. So that's what I'm here for, getting your ducks in a row, getting things organised, and hopefully I often find in my role that if people have things sorted, just seeing how much easier the whole process is. It's a hard time anyway, but if there's financial strain, if there's confusion about where people are living, if there's those big questions about do we or don't we move into aged residential care, or sometimes people think that there's a lot more services available than there actually is, and then I'm the bearer of bad news about talking about actually these are the limitations. I think if we have those conversations well ahead of time, hopefully it just makes people able to just be really present in the moment and spend a quality time with their loved ones rather than having a frantic scramble trying to get things sorted. So, in terms of where you live, I've supported quite a few people who, I think culturally we kind of have this idea that we're all going to be the 95-year-old marathon runner and that we've got lots of time left and we'll sort those things out in the future. I come across this in my work, and then sometimes people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s are facing really challenging health crises, and I'm sometimes supporting people my age who are at end of life, and that's well before they were ever expecting to need to have their ducks in a row. So sometimes in the north, one of the things I experience about where we live that can be a challenge is sometimes with people like me, who's a lifestyle block, who knows how I would take care of it, and then people are needing to go downsize quickly and not really prepared to be doing that work. And if you're really unwell, trying to then move house is real hard. It's a hard, enormous job to do when we're well fit, healthy and strong. But the less health and strength that we have, the harder it becomes to do that job. So I have commonly worked alongside people who have said to me, I wish we'd moved 10 years ago. But it's a really hard thing to do ahead of time, especially if you love where you live, as many people do. It's home. And if you can manage on the day-to-day, people think, well, I don't need to do it yet. But actually the amount of work that is entailed to get you to the next step, if you leave it too long, it becomes too hard. And I have people that I work with who say, we're living where we are now, this isn't ideal, but actually we can't do anything about it. So we're here. So some of the things that I've heard people talk about that's useful to think through is how close are you to a hospital and how close are you to caregivers? In Northland, we're pretty spread out. Lots of the people that we work with at hospice live rurally, and we do as well as we can at getting out to people. But particularly for having caregivers in the home, if you're in a denser population, there are more caregivers doing the work, so it's easier to get care normally if you're living closer into town than if you're living an hour out of town and there's no caregivers in your area. So sometimes we're working with people who have eligibility to get caregivers funded, but they live out at Tutukaka, Matapori, inland somewhere up north, and there's just not caregivers living in that area. So then while you might be eligible for the support and the funding is there, the people on the ground to provide the care are not necessarily in the area. So that's one thing to think about. How your house is laid out. So things like hallways might work really well in ordinary life when you're just walking down a hallway with mobility, but if you need a walker or a wheelchair or people to support you, the width of the hallway becomes quite important. And so sometimes we have people in homes where they have the equipment that they need, but actually the house doesn't really, there's tight corners to be able to move around, and that can make staying at home difficult. Bathrooms is a really common one. I'm often supporting people to get caregivers coming into the home to help with showering. And there's things that we can not think about when we've got full mobility that when you don't have that mobility anymore become really difficult, like a lip on a shower. And you think it's just a step-in shower, but that little lip can sometimes make it really different. So I've definitely worked alongside families who did have their ducks in a row and thought about it ahead of time. And if they were able to fund house renovations, having a bathroom that's a walk-in wet room with space to be able to put the walker and the toilet seat and all the equipment makes it much more doable. My house would not work at all. I've got a shower over a bath and my bathroom's probably about that wide, and it's already challenging with children to navigate. If we had equipment in there, it just wouldn't work. So working alongside people at hospice makes me look at houses quite different. Do you have space for others to stay? So that can also be a factor, that sometimes people nearing end of life do downsize, and then if you need family or friends to come and stay to help care for you, where would they actually stay? Or if you have caregivers coming into the house, is it a physical space that would work for having caregivers in there? And hospice and caregivers and friends and family, we're all creative, flexible people. So I've also seen people provided beautiful care living in a caravan. So it's not to say that you need to have everything set up as impeccably as you possibly could. People get really creative. But if you do have the ability to have a bit more space or to think about where the equipment will go, that can make things a bit easier. Transport is another thing to think about. We live in a very car-based community at the moment, and in Whangarei, lots of us have to travel into town to get to the supermarket, in to get to the doctor. And if you have a car and you can drive, that might be working really well. But if you think about what would it look like if you didn't have access to the car to be able to drive yourself anymore, that can really change the situation. I'll talk a little bit about total mobility scheme at the end, but life can get really isolated if you live out of town and you don't have access to a car anymore, compared to people who have safe footpaths, who can use mobility scooters or who can walk distances in town. That can open up the world a bit. Equipment I've touched on a little bit already. Mostly in this situation, I'm thinking, where would you put equipment? Does it fit in your house? And then maintenance is another thing that I hear people talk about a lot. So, like myself, I'm not set up. My ducks are not in a row, even though I'm the one that's talking about it. I live on a lifestyle block that requires a lot of maintenance. At the moment, I'm able to do that. But if I was thinking about being unwell, or my partner being really unwell, then that would become much more difficult. So it's thinking about how is the property maintained, even just the basic, like the cleaning and the cleaning windows and having the oven cleaned and all of those things that we might be able to do when we're healthy and well become much more difficult. And sometimes I've worked alongside people who do have beautiful properties in the country where there is a lot of maintenance required and they're well, and then all of a sudden they're not well anymore, and then it's really hard to sort out the shed, figure out where all those tools are going to go, think about the animals. And if there's a person, often when I'm working with people that is a couple, and there might be that both of them have had their jobs in the relationship and the things that they've been responsible for, and then I see when one person is unwell, the other person picking up everything that they used to do, plus providing care, plus doing everything that they did in the first place. And that's really exhausting. So if we have more of this sorted to lower the burden of the work that's involved in just the day-to-day, then that frees up a bit of capacity for people if they're providing care as well. Does that make sense? Yeah? And my last question was just what would it take to be able to move? And that's what I was mentioning before. Sometimes actually you might think it would be good to move, but the work involved is too big and too hard at that point to actually make it happen. So often what I find really heartbreaking in my work is when people are in that balance of decision making, of trying to get set up for the future, but also not wanting to have a negative impact on your current quality of life. And hospice is all about quality of life. We want people to live happy, whole, full, nourished lives. And if you're living on a lifestyle block and that's giving you heaps of joy, but you know you need to move at some point, it's really hard to know when that point is to be able to make the move. Same with going into aged residential care. I see people going, well, I don't need it today, but I will need it soon. And then, unfortunately, when we get to the point of really needing it, systems take a while and it's a lot of work to get things sorted, and so that can get really tough. So part of my motivation today for sharing some of what I've learned in my time at hospice is that I get the heartbreaking phone calls where people ring me and say, I can't do this another day. And at that point, that's really hard when I go, well, we might have another few weeks of having to do what you can't do anymore before we can get new systems in place that are going to support you. So it's always that challenge of wanting to have made decisions a while ago to be a friend to your future self, but not really knowing exactly how your health journey will go because it's unpredictable and nobody's got a future ball. Sorry, what are they called? A crystal ball to look into the future. So it's a challenge.